Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. So tonight we're celebrating SIMCHAT Torah, which I've never taken the Torah out to bring it in here, but I gave it a seat of honor. Which, and even in my traditional shuls, when we didn't have another place to put it, we put it on a nice chair. But I think we usually wrapped a tallis around it, unless one of you guys brought a tallis. I don't have one handy. So yeah, we're going to celebrate that. And thank you all for coming. This is our first regular service since the high holidays. So next week is basically the eve of the election. And I'm going to talk about everything but the election. Well, what I am going to talk about is us sort of keeping our center, keeping our optimism, finding ways to keep our lives in balance. I know there were people, me for instance, who had a little bit of a breakdown in 2016. And I know some of you, yes, I've talked to you all over the years. So we're not going to let that happen to our mental health. That's the topic on the 1st. There is no service on the 8th. So Audrey, you have something to announce. Yes? I called on you. The date will be December 13th at 6 p.m. It's already on the calendar and it's all over the newsletter, including a link to this flyer that Audrey has. So all the instructions are also online. We're doing it early because, in case you hadn't heard, Hanukkah doesn't start till after Christmas. It starts on the night of Christmas. So, or as we say in Hebrew, Motzei Christmas. Motzi Christmas, you know, the end of Shabbat is Motzi Shabbos. Never mind, I think I need to put that in my next Introduction to Judaism class. All right, our readers tonight are going to, aside from Ned, who's going to do a reading at the end, are going to come up together. So we're going to have Ruth, Lonnie, Audrey, and Rabbi Miriam Jeris are going to come up together to do a little set of readings about Simchas Torah, some new ones. And we will then just begin on page 1, and I'm going to do the other ones other than one Ned's doing, which is a great one. And we'll start on page 1, Arthur, if you will. All right, so Shabbat Shalom all. This is the promise of Shabbat. After noise, we seek quiet. After crowds of indifferent strangers, we seek to touch those we love. After concentration on work or responsibility, we seek freedom to meditate, listening to our inward selves. We open our eyes to the hidden beauties and the infinite possibilities in the world we are creating. We break open the gates of the reservoirs of goodness and kindness in ourselves and in others as we reach toward one beautiful moment of Shabbat. I'd like to invite Carol Goldsmith to come light our candles.
Baruch haor ba'olam. Baruch haor ba'adam. Baruch haor ba'shalom. Ba'shalom. Baruch
Achad Ha'am wrote, a Jew who feels a real tie with the life of their people throughout the generations will find it utterly impossible to think of the existence of the Jew without Shabbat. One can say that without exaggeration, more than the Jews have kept Shabbat, Shabbat has kept the Jews. On Shabbat, we celebrate the gift of life and possibility. On Shabbat, we put aside conflict and make peace with one another. On Shabbat, we draw renewed sustenance from our Jewish heritage and traditions.
Shabbat nekabla, lecha dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabla, lecha dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabla, lecha dodi likrat kala. B'nei Shabbat nekabla, likrat Shabbat lekhu b'nelcha, yet habraka imevia, b'simcha beria, hola, b'nei Shabbat nekabla, lecha dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabla, dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabla.
Loving life and its mystery, with all my heart and all my spirit, with all my senses and all my strength, I take upon myself these promises: to care for the earth and all who live on it, to pursue justice and peace, to love kindness and compassion. I will teach these to my children throughout the day, as I dwell in my home, and as I go on my journey from the time I rise up until I fall asleep.
My hope is in me. Where is my strength? My strength is in me and in you, and in you. Where is my strength? My strength is in me and in you, and in you.
Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan wrote, don't merely expect to find or to believe that life is worthwhile, make it worthwhile. Don't merely see life whole, make it whole. Not knowing which should come first, to improve oneself or to improve the world, we end up doing neither. Actually, the only way to improve the world is by improving oneself, and the only way to improve oneself is by improving the world.
Sorry, I turned too many pages. Niftat lanu ken v'chesed v'rachamim niftach lanu sha'arei tzedek ken v'chesed v'rachamim.
So tonight, actually we're ending SIMCHAT Torah, but this weekend has been both Shmini Atzeret and SIMCHAT Torah, and I'll explain what the differences are in just a few minutes. But I want to invite at this time our next 4 readers to come up together: Ruth Kadish, Lonnie Fleischer, Audrey Pleasant, and Rabbi Miriam Jairus.
Throughout Jewish history, Torah was considered the infallible revelation of a supernatural deity. Every word deemed eternally true, all-encompassing in its wisdom. For humanistic Jews, however, all texts are seen as the creations of human beings, subject to error. Yet the Torah, by virtue of its historic centrality for Jews, still serves as a symbol, if not the source, of truth. Though not a reliable depiction of Jewish history as the first Jewish saga, it is an indispensable path to understanding what our ancestors believed about their history. The Torah, shaped by the time in which it was written, does not serve as an ethical guide. It reflects the values and norms of its era. Still, its teachings to love one's neighbor, care for the stranger, and help those in need remind us that these rational and universal values have deep roots in our tradition. As literature, it also possesses stunning beauty. Its narratives are epic, its characters indelible. Traditional Jews call it the tree of life. Humanistic Jews might see it as the root of Jewish civilization.
Handmade, man-made, teller of stories, maker of myths. Unroll it, unbind it, approach it, unwind it. Symbol of wisdom, source of tradition. Look deep within it. Find your own truth.
Connecting to the Torah. For humanistic Jews, all literature is the product of human creativity, from ancient religious text to modern secular works. The Torah, as the foundational text of our tradition, holds a unique place, not only as the starting point of Jewish literature, but also as a powerful expression of the values, struggles, and aspirations of our ancestors. While we may view it as a human creation, its influence and wisdom resonates across time, standing alongside the great works of Jewish thought and culture that have followed. Our values come from many sources: personal experience, family traditions, and the voices of those who lived long ago. Though we do not look to the Torah as a source of wisdom, it remains a powerful symbol of our ancestors' concerns and the truths they sought to understand. While our world has changed, some things never do. Life's trials, the need for connection, and the desire for guidance.
Just talk loud.
Just talk loud, okay. Jewish literature began with the Torah, but it certainly did not end there. Jewish literary tradition is ongoing, a continuous thread of creativity woven through the centuries. Written in many languages, including Hebrew, Aramaic, Yiddish, and Ladino, this vast body of work reflects the evolving experiences of Jewish life. Early writings include those of priests, prophets, and rabbis, while later works encompass the voices of secular writers like Gertrude Stein and Henry Roth, and intellectuals such as Emma Lazarus and Albert Einstein. SIMCHAT Torah is a time to celebrate not just the Torah itself, but the enduring conversation that it inaugurated between past and present. As we engage with both ancient and modern Jewish texts, we affirm the wisdom of seeking, questioning, and discovering our own truths. Today, we celebrate this ongoing conversation. May SIMCHAT Torah invite us to honor our heritage while embracing the freedom to write our own stories.
Thank you very much. We're going to continue with a song that we did on the holiday, Am Yisrael Chai. We say, Od Avinu Chai, our ancestors live on. Of course, we mean this metaphorically. And we also added a verse, Od Amenu Chai, our people lives on. Many ways through its words.
Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai. 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 Od Avinu Chai, Od Avinu Chai. Od Avinu, Od Avinu, Od Avinu Chai. Od Amenu Chai, Od Amenu Chai. Od Avinu, Od Avinu, Od Avinu Chai. Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael 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 Chai. Od Amenu Chai, Od Amenu Chai. Od Amenu, Od Amenu, Od Amenu Chai. Od Amenu Chai, Od Amenu Chai. Od Amenu, Od Amenu, Od Amenu Chai. Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael 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 Chai.
The merger poem. And then all that has divided us will merge, and then compassion will be wedded to power, and then softness will come to a world that is harsh and unkind, and then all will be gentle, and then all will be strong, and then no person will be subject to another's will, and then all will be rich and free and varied, and then the greed of some will give way to the needs of many. And then all will share equally in the earth's abundance. And then all will care for the sick and the weak and the old. And then all will nourish the young. And then all will cherish life's creatures. And then all will live in harmony with each other and the earth. And then everywhere will be called Eden once again.
Na'aseh shalom ba'olam, na'aseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol ha'olam, ve'imru shalom. Na'aseh shalom ba'olam, na'aseh shalom aleinu, ve'akol ha'olam, ve'imru shalom, shalom. Na'aseh shalom ba'olam, na'aseh shalom aleinu, ve'akol ha'olam, ve'imru shalom. Na'aseh shalom ba'olam, na'aseh shalom aleinu.
this community, where we find strength and common purpose, we turn our minds and hearts toward all those who need our love and support. Those who are ill, those who suffer pain of the body or spirit, those who are lonely, and those who have been wronged. Tonight, our well wishes are extended to these members of our community and their loved ones, to Carolyn Lowe and Jim Walker, along with those whom you now have an opportunity to remember or think about. On this side, anybody? No? Okay, anybody over here? Miriam?
Donna Francis.
Thank you. Howard? Did we miss anybody? May all who suffer know that they are not alone, and may they be healed quickly. May they experience a complete recovery, a refuah shlema, the renewal of their bodies and the renewal of their spirits. At darker times in Jewish history, there were moments that came at this very point in Jewish services when prayers were offered for those held hostage. To redeem captives was considered an essential mitzvah. We are again in that reality. I believe it's been close to 390 days, if I haven't lost count. In the spirit of our ancestors who lived through those terrible days, we voice these fervent hopes. May those taken captive find the courage to carry on. May those who love them not despair of their return. May they soon emerge from their confinement, whole in body and in spirit, to know once again the embrace of their loved ones.
מקום הכוח בתוכנו, מקורות הברכה מעברותינו. May the source of strength that dwells so deep within us help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing. And let us say, Shalom. Mekom hakoach betochenu, mekorot habracha me'evrotenu. May those in need of healing know refuah shlema. The renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Shalom.
'Tis a fearful thing to love what death can touch. A fearful thing to love, to hope, to dream, to be, and oh, to lose. A thing for fools this, and a sacred thing to love. For your life has lived in me. Your laugh once lifted me. Your word was gift to me. To remember this brings painful joy. 'Tis a human thing, love, a sacred thing, to love what death has touched. Our thoughts turn to those who are no longer with us, our own loved ones, those whom our friends and neighbors have lost, the martyrs of our people, whose graves are unmarked, and those of every people and nation whose lives have been a blessing to humanity. As we remember them, we meditate on the meaning of love and loss, of life and death. We recall now our loved ones whom death has recently taken from us, those who died at this season in years past, and those whom we have taken into our hearts with our own. As tonight we observe the yard sites of these members of our community and their loved ones, of Frank DiMaggio, Leonard Fox, Hilda Gins, Hugh W. Greenberg, Kenneth Mitchell Jacoby, Audrey Crone, Victor Kuffler, Belle Matthews, Ben Matthews, Irving Miller, Abe Rosenshine, Alfred Jack Sellen, Jeff Spillman, and Edward Stowicki. If there's a name you'd like to add this evening whom you're remembering. Thank you. Anybody else on this side? Thank you. Anybody on this side? Anybody we missed? We say, Yehi zikram livracha, may their memories be a blessing. Our way of saying that as we recall them, we hope we can do so with the joyful pain that the writer spoke about. If you can do so comfortably, please rise as together we recite our humanistic interpretation of Kaddish. Nit gadal v'nit kadash beruach ha'adam. Let us dignify and ennoble all people in the spirit of our shared humanity. Let us acclaim the preciousness of life. Let us show gratitude for life by approaching it with reverence. Let us embrace the whole world, even as we wrestle with its parts. Let each, in our own way, take up our share in serving the world, seeking truth. May our commitment to life help us to strengthen healing of spirit and peace of mind. May justice and peace permeate and comfort the house of Israel and all those who dwell on earth. And let us say, Ken Yehi, may it be so. Please be seated. So let me just go get the right glasses. You know, when I came here 11 years ago, I had one pair of bifocals. I now have 4 pairs of glasses that I rotate. And hearing aids that I never wear, so there you go. I guess that's a good sign of my longevity, right? All right. So tonight we're gonna actually try to have some simcha, some joy, some celebration about our Torah, and not just our Torah, but its other books. But first, let me just remind you briefly what this holiday is about. It's always been a kind of a funny one for humanistic Jews, because not that all the Jews in our community are dancing around with Torahs last night or the night before, depending on when they celebrate the holiday, but we've never danced with our Torah. And especially in this congregation, alone in many ways among the humanistic congregations that own a Torah, we don't really ritualize it at all. They kind of a little tiny bit do in other places. Kol Chadash pulls it out, they undress it and so forth. When I've had a bar mitzvah that reads from the Torah, we usually just put it on a table next to it. We cover it, you know, with the cover, have it all rolled to the right place, and they incorporate it into their speech. And it's not that we don't love the Torah. We do love the Torah. It's a very, very important piece of literature. And I've written about Bible and ancient Jewish texts in particular for humanistic Jews and other secular people. I highly recommend it. I think it's more fun the way we do it. I think it's more interesting because it adds a level. It doesn't detract. And we don't have to pretend we're seeing our values in there. We can celebrate when we do, and we can say, okay, that was them, when we don't. SIMCHAT Torah is actually one of, as I count, one of 3 Jewish holidays that are diaspora-oriented, or originated, I should say, not oriented, originated, maybe 4. So the first 2 would be, believe it or not, Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, which seem to have their roots in Babylonian society. And that may explain why they kind of fall at a time that really almost gets in the way of one of our more ancient holidays, which is Sukkot, which we've just now finished up, right? And then there's, I would say probably Purim. Certainly the story is a diaspora story, although we're not sure exactly how it all got over to Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, and every place else. And then there's SIMCHAT Torah. SIMCHAT Torah is a diaspora holiday. We know this, first of all, because it's very new. It's only 1,400 years old. SIMCHAT Torah is because of something it says in the Torah. So you know we have this cockamamie thing where if you live in Israel, you have a shorter series of days and holidays. If you're outside of Israel, you have more. You add one because we didn't know how to do a calendar. And even though we've known how to do a calendar for 2,000 years, we still pretend we don't know how to do a calendar because, you know, tradition. So, and more days that have to be taken off from work. So Shmini Atzeret is the holiday that this really is. Shmini Atzeret comes at the end of Sukkot. So Sukkot's a 7-day holiday in the Torah. And then there's the 8th day called Shmini Atzeret, which has the really glamorous meaning of 8th day of doing nothing. Just day of gathering. Doesn't tell you what you're supposed to do, maybe some extra sacrifices, but that's about it. And then we get out into the diaspora, right? And now we have to add a 9th day, because the 8th day of doing nothing wasn't enough. Now a 9th day. So it's not that we don't do anything on the 8th day. We pray for rain in Israel, of course, because everything is linked to the Israeli calendar. But on the 9th day, we didn't have a damn thing to do. So at some point, the rabbis of, like I say, about probably 1600 years ago, decided we got to give them something to do. And they came up with a good one. They said, well, every year at this time, we tend to end the reading of the Torah, so let's end it and begin it again. So how do we know this happened in the diaspora? That's where they did the annual cycle. Believe it or not, it took them 3 years to get through the Torah in Israel. It was a 3-year cycle. I don't know why. Maybe they were reading slower. Maybe they were slower readers. I don't want to cast aspersion. They had been through a lot of Romans, a lot of others, so we're not going to judge, but that's how we got there. Now, of course, the Torah is, we say, the foundation of our literature. It's actually not the oldest literature, but it is the oldest work that was put together by a lot of the people who wrote other pieces of our literature contemporaneously. There will be a prize, a cash prize, sure, why not? For anybody who, without Googling it, can name the text of the Bible without Googling it that contains the very oldest Hebrew text. Some believe that it's in Exodus, but it's not. At least I don't think it is. But you can't Google it. And the cash is really very little. In any case, out of the Torah, of course, we also have, as we get further down the line in the so-called Old Testament, which is a very Christian way of calling the Hebrew Bible, we get into all those other books, some of which were written contemporaneously with parts of the Torah, others of which kind of show us things that were happening when the Torah was edited. And then after the Jewish people are allowed to return to Israel, there's a little bit more writing that goes on. So this is around 580s BCE, 470s BCE now. And then there seems to be kind of a dearth. We don't really know what happened. There's a lot of Greek-oriented things that happen there. And then at the beginning of the Alexandrian era, we begin to see a little bit of a rebirth of this literature. Ecclesiastes, importantly, what we call in Hebrew Kohelet, which is the great humanistic book. I'm actually going to be referring to it in just a moment. But then we get to the rabbinical literature, which comes around the 2nd century BCE, which starts to kick in. It's not really written literature. In fact, nothing that the rabbis did was originally written down. They memorized it. They didn't have a lot else to do, let's be frank. And it was a little bit formulaic, and they didn't have anything else to do. So there were people who were very good at this, and then ultimately that turned into the Mishnah, which is the very terse legal work of our people that it was codified around 200 CE. And not only did they remember all the parts of it, again, remembered it, because it was oral and they didn't want it to replace the Torah, it was all superstition behind it, but they also remembered all the stuff they cut out. So they had this whole extra body of stuff. That will be important because they didn't stop working on it. The Mishnah left a lot of questions open. We'll look at a little example tonight in a moment. But it left a lot of questions open, like how the hell did they come up with that? That kind of question. And so this process continued in a body of work called the Gemara. But you know this work better by its combined name, the Mishnah and the Gemara, which is, small cash prize if you know this one. Say it? The Talmud, exactly, the Talmud, which seems to have sort of closed around 500, also memorized, way harder, super impressive, because it's in Aramaic. Now, if you've ever studied it, even if you've studied it, especially if you studied it in English, but even, I studied it mostly in Hebrew, because my Aramaic is, but I studied it in Hebrew, and I can figure out an Aramaic word from a Hebrew word, and vice versa. But there's lots of what we call lacunae, big empty spaces. That's because it had its own sort of shorthand. And it had code words and code phrases for legal terms that were used all the time. And that was a really important work because it turned into the Talmud. And there were two, by the way. One that started in Israel and sort of got cut off in the 3rd century when the remainder of the Jews were thrown out. And the other one, which we call the Babylonian Talmud, which is what you just simply know of as the Talmud. And then if you've ever opened a page of Talmud, there's all this other stuff all around the outside and everything, and that's just commentary and commentary and commentary for years and years afterwards. But I'll show you a little bit about how that works. From there, we get these wonderful works of Midrash. So the Talmud in all Jewish literature basically has two typologies, halakha or halacha, meaning laws or legal stuff, and midrash, meaning sort of lore. There's actually more complicated terms for this, but if I tell them to you, you're going to go to sleep faster than you will anyway. So I'm not going to get into that. But these are the basic two typologies, lore and law. Now you can remember that, right? So there was a lot of lore that made its way into the Talmud, including all kinds of lore about the Bible where they would fill in blanks. We'll see one of those in a moment. But also stories about themselves. They love to talk about themselves. And it's really a huge historical treasure for us that they do talk about themselves. And then there were these collections of midrash that began to appear probably around 1500 years ago. And these were based on rabbis giving sermons and rabbis teaching in academies, or traveling people who would teach children and so forth. And all these stories were collected. We've been collecting them now up until very recently. A book called Sefer Agadah was published, I want to say in the early 20th century, sometime early to mid 20th century, and that's a collection of more collections that became in and of itself a very important work, because it was the first time anybody took all the midrashim about the Bible and put them in the chronological order of the Bible. You would think that would have been done, but it wasn't. There were places where it was done, but then it kind of like drifted off or went in its own way. And then there's all these later collections and collections of halakha, and then, as we mentioned in talking about things, all the secular literature and all the other kinds of philosophical literature. So this we tend to call the Jewish bookshelf. This is this vast tapestry of Jewish thought. Years ago, I gave, not many years ago, but a few years ago, I gave a review about Amos Oz of blessed memory and his daughter, Cynthia, oh God, I'm going to get it wrong, so I'm not going to say it. Fania Sulzberger Oz. They wrote a book called Jews and Words, which was just a wonderful, it's a look at the Jewish people, which is why I picked Am Yisrael Chai tonight. The Jewish people as being, in many ways, kept together by our words. Not because all the words agree with each other or because they tell the same story, but because they are part of the same conversation. And I like to think of that as being the literature of the Jewish family, which is really what we mean by a Jewish nation. Okay, so we're going to visit a few little examples here. I'll tell you some stories and show you how some of this worked. And then we're going to end with one, we're going to go back to the Talmud, we're going to end with one that has a little bit of a spooky kind of essence to it, because after all, it is the holy day of Halloween coming up. And then we have even a little special song that Joseph and I worked on in honor of Halloween. In any case, all right, so let's start with the Mishnah. I'm going to give just a very short Mishnah. Some of you have seen this guy in town who rides around with a bicycle with a sukkah on it. How many of you have seen him? No? Oh, I've said last year, like 5 or 6 people asked me about him. All right, never mind. If you go to the cider mill, you'll see him sometimes. Now it's over, so I can't send you there. Anyway, there's a guy in town, a Chabadnik, who has a sukkah on his bicycle, which I thought would relate more to something you had experienced. But anyway, can you have a sukkah on a bicycle? Well, if it's a Chabadnik, it must be yes, right? But where did he get this cockamamie idea that you could have a sukkah on a bicycle? Well, he got it from the Mishnah, where they talked about where can you build a sukkah? And of course, it raises a lot of questions. How you build a sukkah is also an important issue. By the way, just a little fun fact, doesn't have to be a temporary structure. In Germany in the Middle Ages, they would sometimes build a retractable roof, because really the thing that has to be temporary is the roof, and everything else can be permanent. But by and large, we don't have a lot of permanent sukkahs. Sometimes people, although I have seen some, and in Israel you'll find some. So the rabbis are talking about where you can actually build one. So it says if somebody builds a sukkah on the top of a wagon, it's kosher. If they build it on the top of a ship, even though a ship is portable, it's kosher. And that was important. People would travel. They wanted a sukkah on their ship. It is enough, they say, for the sukkah, meaning, they mean, of course, just the roof part, to be a temporary residence. What about the case of one who builds his sukkah at the top of a tree or upon a camel? The sukkah is kosher. Why then a separate category? One may not climb up to it or enter it on the first holy day of the festival. That's the day when more of the Shabbat strictures are in place, because the sages prohibit climbing or using a tree or using an animal, or presumably a bicycle, I can tell you it's the same rule, on the festival. So it's a limited use, kind of a limited deal that you have. But if your aim is to go around, as they now do in Royal Oak, where I live very frequently, and look for the mezuzahs on people's houses and invite them, I don't know, to hear the shofar, to wave the lulav and etrog, to have, they've never given me money yet, but maybe they will someday. But if that's their goal, they will maybe bring a sukkah to your house and invite you to walk into their bicycle sukkah and say a blessing, and then you will have done it. So with the Talmud, with the Gemara, there's an interplay. We're done with the sukkah. We're done with let's talk about an interplay. So one of the most discussed things in the Talmud, in the Mishnah, is Shabbat. Some of you have studied this with me. I always look at Audrey because you're the one I know studied this with me. How do we know what we're not allowed to do on Shabbat? Not us, per se, but Jews, world over, who do these things. How do you know? The Torah is barely helpful. So the Torah tells us just a very few things. Among them are don't make a fire, don't work, whatever work means. There's 3 or 4 different Hebrew words for work. So exactly what they're talking about, it's very difficult to know. Definitely don't go around collecting manna. Because if you'll recall, the story of the guy who collected the manna was the guy, God struck him dead. So do not collect things on the day of Shabbat, and that includes carrying things in the public domain. So that's it. If that's all we had to do in Shabbat, it'd be a much easier day. To watch, like family members I know would really, really love to be watching the World Series tonight. And I don't know how they're going to do that. Perhaps they'll find a workaround. It turns out you can look at a TV. You just can't turn it on and off. So we'll find out later what the Orthodox Jews are doing. Forward had an article about this today. So the rabbis then, in the Mishnah, they state that there are things that we can't do, like sowing seeds and plowing and reaping and even writing. But they leave out the reasons why in the Mishnah. And so we have no idea where they come from until the Gemara, until this process of interpreting the Mishnah comes along. So the Gemara, you can imagine now a group of sages sitting around in the academy, presumably in Babylon, possibly in Israel, maybe both. And this is directly from the Talmud. The sages who sat and discussed the issue of what we can and cannot do on Shabbat, which we have learned in the Mishnah, these categories of labor, which are prohibited by Torah law and Shabbat, they enumerated as 40 less 1. This is a really fun way to count, and I suggest that we all take up, whenever we want to say 39 or 9, so it should be 10 less 1, 40 less 1, etc. And then they say, what is the source of this number? Well, as it turns out, there's a guy, he's one of these crossover guys, lived during the time of the Mishnah, and as they began to talk about it in the Gemara era. Rabbi Hanina Bar Chama said, they correspond to the labors in the tabernacle, the portable temple in the wilderness. All the types of labor, he said, that were performed in the tabernacle are enumerated as the primary categories of labor with respect to Shabbat. And he goes on to explain why, and it's so ridiculous I'm not going to share it with you. But this is how the two texts interact. One says, this is the rule, and sometimes even has minority opinions, and the other one says, how, why, what's the legal reasoning, et cetera, et cetera. And those of you who are lawyers, and there's at least 3 sitting just abutting each other here, know that when you get to principles of law, you sometimes have to look at a law and say, what principle of law does this fit under? A lot of the Talmud is that, which is why it put me to sleep. In any case, people do study the Talmud despite its complexity. There's tens of thousands of people, probably more now, who participate in this thing called the Daf Yomi, the daily study of one page of the Talmud. The pages are all based on the 19th century printing in Vilna, and that's actually how we paginate them to this day. And they get through them. There's like advanced ways of reading them and less advanced reading. But that was just to sort of show you how these works operate. What I really wanted to do tonight was share with you some of the stories. So here's a few. Every now and then, actually it's pretty frequently, they get to some story about what they learned from their rabbi and how the disciples reacted and this and that. And we have a story here that I'm going to share with you about sex. Sex is a very big topic in the Talmud. I first encountered this story when I took a course, I think I was probably in college, yeah. I took a course about Judaism and sex at the Hillel. So it was a great Hillel, by the way. And I don't say that just because I took a class in text. It's just a good Hillel. That's all. This is called The Disciple Under the Marital Bed. So it's a humorous story. It's a little bit awkward, about this rabbi named Kahana. And it is actually preceded by two even more awkward stories that I decided not to share with you. Those two stories are about some disciples who followed their rabbi into the bathroom so they could listen to him, let's just say number two, and discern which way is the right direction to face as you do this, and how is best to cleanse oneself after, and with what hand you should do it. And when they were challenged about this kind of weirdness that they participated in, by the way, the answer is you wipe with the left hand, not the right hand, for, I guess, obvious reasons that many in the Near East do. Their answer was, but this is Torah, so we must learn it. Well, it continues then with this tidbit about Rav Kahana, who one night decides to hide under the bed of Rav, who is the most important rabbi of the early Talmudic era. This is directly from the Talmud. The Gemara relates that Rav Kahana once entered and lay beneath Rav's bed. He heard Rav chatting and laughing with his wife, seeing to his needs. Wink, wink. I don't have to tell you what that is, right? In the middle of it, Rav Kahana said to Rav, from under the bed, "Your mouth, it's like one who has never eaten a cooked dish." Meaning, you sound really hungry and lusty. Rav, somewhat surprised, and we can presume not particularly pleased, said what we would say, "Kahana, is that you? Leave this instant." And the Gemara goes on to say, as this is an undesirable mode of behavior. Presumably, as he was leaving, Rav Kahana said to his teacher, "But it is Torah, so I must learn it." Okay, let's move on to Midrash. The rest are not so scandalous. The point of Midrash, as I mentioned, was generally to fill in the gaps of Scripture, to add some new layers to biblical stories where details seem to be missing, where there seems to be some need for some spiritual lesson or just an explanation to something that just seems kind of lacking. There is Midrashic material throughout the Talmud. We've got these collections. Some, however, are so famous and so often told that people growing up think that they're actually in the Torah. Now, over the years, I discovered this with regard to one story in particular. It's the story of Abraham smashing the idols. Have you all heard this? Who's heard this? Okay, that's a lot of people. Okay, I always get a good response to that. Not in the Torah. Nowhere in the Torah. It's a midrash. It comes to us from a written text called Genesis Rabbah. The large collection of Genesis stories is how that translates into. And people are always, as you just demonstrated to me, are always surprised when they hear this. So as I read it to you, try to think why somebody would write this story about Abraham. Here's how the whole story goes. First, they cite their sources. It's always a good thing to do. So it begins in Genesis Rabbah saying, Rav Chia, the grandson, by the way, of Rav Ada of Jaffa, told this story. Abraham's father, Terach, was an idol worshiper and a seller of idols. One day he went away on a trip, and he appointed Abraham as salesman in his stead. But when a person would come in seeking to buy an idol, Abraham would say to him, "How old are you?" When the buyer said something like, "I'm 40, I'm 50, I'm 60, Abraham would reply, "Oi, woe to this man, oi to this man," that's what it literally says, "who is 60 years old and seeks to bow before something that's less than a day old." The customer would be shamed and leave, which just parenthetically was not good for business. One time a woman came in carrying a dish of fine flour in her hand. This is presumably a sacrifice to the idols. And she says to Abraham, "Here, I brought this to offer the idols." After she left, he took a club in his hand, shattered all the idols, placed the club in the hands of the biggest idol. And when his father returned, he said to him, "Who did this to them?" Abraham said to him, I cannot lie to you, father. A woman came in carrying a dish of fine flour in her hand. She said to me, "Here, offer it before them." After she left, I offered it before them. This one idol said, I shall be eating it first. The other said, it is mine, I shall eat it first. This other one, the big one here, standing among them all, he got up and he took a club and he shattered the rest of them. Terach said to his son, are you mocking me? Are they sentient? Do they have awareness? Do your ears not hear what your mouth is saying? Which of course was the proof that even Abraham's father didn't believe this stuff. So why would they have a story? Anybody have a guess? Why would they invent the story? Why do you think? What do you think's missing in the Torah? We've got nothing in the Torah that says why Abraham was picked. Now, we all grew up with that, oh, because he was the first monotheist. And there's these children's stories also from the Midrash of Abraham looking around when he was a kid, you know, looking at the sun. And, are you God? No, somebody must have made you, so there must be a bigger God than you. And then finally, Abraham arriving at monotheism, the great idea of the ancient Jewish people. But the Torah, by the way, if you don't already know this from listening to me and Sherwin for all these years, the Torah is not a monotheistic text. It's actually very, very missing or lacking in monotheism. That favorite song of us, Who is Like You, Micha Mocha, Among the Gods, which my Reformed prayer book always translated as among the false gods, but it doesn't say false gods, it's just gods. The presumption is there are other gods. Torah is a Yahweh-centric book. It's about Yahweh becoming the God of the Jewish people and the Israelite people, etc. It is not about Abraham becoming a monotheist, and we have no understanding whatsoever of why he picked Abraham. But I can tell you one thing that's not true. It was not because he was a monotheist. It was a very interesting, and I'm not sure great progress move for the Jews, but it didn't happen until probably about 2,500 years ago. And Abraham, who didn't live, but at least we don't think he did, he would have to be placed, according to the Bible's own chronology, about 4,000 years ago. So here's another story. This one I really like, and I actually, I like them all, but this one I like enough that I had thought about even including it in the sermon a couple years ago, because it has a little bit of a humanistic observation in it that I like. So in this story, which also comes from that same work, Genesis Rabbah, we have a scene where angels who are making up the entourage of God are discussing with God the creation of humanity that's upcoming, arguing about what the flaws and virtues of this proposed creation would be. One angel, and you have to understand that these angels don't really have wills of their own. God creates them to sort of mouth a value or something. Satan, in the book of Job, he's a prosecutor, and his whole thing is just to accuse people whether they're good or bad. That's his job. If he's asked to do it, he does it. Doesn't have to worry about their real guilt. So these really usually, they represent values, and they're sort of the personification of values. That's the metaphorical aspect. So one angel turns to God and quotes something in the Bible from much later from a psalm. What is man that you are mindful of him? You might actually know that one. So this sets the story in motion, and this is from the text. When the Holy One, blessed be he, began to create Adam, the first man, these angels of his entourage up in heaven divided into various factions and various groups. Some of them were saying, let him not be created, and some of them were saying, let him be created. One angel, called Kindness, said, let him be created, for he will perform acts of kindness. Another angel, named Truth, said, let him not be created, as he is full of lies. Yet a third angel, named Righteousness, said, let him be created, he can perform acts of righteousness. And a fourth, named Peace, said, let him not be created, he is filled with discord. And so what did the Holy One, blessed be he, do? He took truth and he cast it down to earth. They cite a biblical verse reminding us of that, where God is said to have cast truth earthward. And then the ministering angel said to the Holy One, blessed be he, Master of the universe, why are you demeaning this, the most important of your values, this angel of all angels? And God replied, truth will ascend from the earth. The rabbis noted that after humanity was created, the Torah said God saw everything he had made, and behold, it was not just good, but very good. And the Midrash continues by saying, why? Why very good? Because humanity can be good, very good, when he discovers the truth on his own. So as you can see, there's a real important observation here, that if we are to get to the truth of anything, we have to do it ourselves. And I don't think I'm even overreading this a little bit to say that this is a humanistic text. This recognizes the human power to discern truth. Okay, so there are some other texts that I just want to mention briefly, and then I'm going to conclude with our little story from the Talmud. One of them, this is when I decided to do this is the reason I decided to do it, because of this text. It is not in the Jewish canon, however. We only have it in somewhat large but still fragmentary texts. It's called Shiur Koma. It means the measure of the stature. It's a mystical text from about maybe 1,000, 1,200 years ago that actually describes the dimensions of God's body in a way that is supposed to make it utterly incomprehensible. Now, some have proposed it was satire. Some have proposed it was just trying to make that very point, like you could never do that. But you can imagine that most rabbis thought, this is incredible. Get this book out of our bookshelf. Nobody should read this book, which is probably why it wasn't preserved, because it has things, for instance, that says, God's eyebrows are hundreds of thousands of miles long. This kind of over-the-top when I first heard about this book, I really thought my professor was joking with me, but he brought evidence that this actually existed. And then there is my least favorite book on the Jewish bookshelf, but still I think it's worthy of us recognizing, the Zohar, right? Everybody has become familiar with the Zohar because of the whole Kabbalah movement, which I hope is dying down at some point. It is by no means the only mystical literature. Judaism has a long mystical tradition. The Talmud talks about mysticism. And in fact, it says if you're not 40 years old and very learned in the Torah, you shouldn't even study this esoteric stuff. So the Talmud has it. There were other movements. But the Zohar took the cake. It is indescribably complicated. It is filled with so much esoterica that it has inspired, how many movies and shows with tarot cards and all kinds of silly supernatural things in it. It's really incredible in that way. But also it's got some interesting psychological insights that I suppose is what attracts people to study it. But the real reason I wanted to bring it up, other than the fact that it's used to rip off a lot of people who have better things to do with their money and might find more truth in humanistic Judaism than, say, the rabbi who just charged them $1,000 for 10 weeks of classes and this beautiful edition of the Zohar they'll never read, is because of who wrote it. Because this is one of the most interesting things about the book, is the author. Now, the book is ascribed to a first-century rabbi named Shimon Bar Yochai, a very important rabbi. It was said to have hidden in the Galilee during the 2nd century, I should say, during the Bar Kokhba revolt, and he's connected to the celebration of Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the Omer, when the bonfires are lit and all that. There's all kinds of legends about that. But he didn't write it. Nobody who has any kind of historical background or understands how texts are written thinks that he wrote it. The Aramaic in it, for one, is clearly the Aramaic of someone who ran into Aramaic like I did in a classroom and was trying to imitate the Aramaic of 1,200 years ago, because that's approximately was written, was around 1280, something like that. And it was written by a Spanish rabbi named Moshe de Leon, who was famous, by the way, for his forgeries, very, very well known for forgeries. But what is significant about it is that it kind of fits in with something we were talking about in our American Judaism class when we were reviewing some of the experiences of the first Spanish and Portuguese Jews who came here. And somebody asked what was going on before 1492. Well, in the 13th century, the 12th century into the 13th century, the Reconquista had happened, which meant the Christians were coming from the north. Much, much less tolerant Muslims were coming from the south, from North Africa. And the age of Maimonides and reason and rationalism and Neo-Aristotelianism was dead, and mysticism took its place. And that's where the Zohar comes from. There are some interesting little stories in it. This one took 2 pages to get to the point. And so I didn't read all 2 pages. I just read the point. Or I read the summary of the point. It's called The Donkey Driver Who Knew More Than the Sages. It's essentially about a donkey driver who listens to all this esoterica from these rabbis whom he's leading around. And then at the end, he has an insight. Okay, It's really, really boring, but it does have the important lesson that there are better places to get your insights from sometimes than sages or charlatans who sell you $10,000 worth of Kabbalah courses. Okay, since we're close to Halloween, I'm going to end with a Halloweenische. That's a Yiddish saying. That's the actual Yiddish word. A Halloweenische tale from the Talmud. Now, the reason that my colleague here is approaching the piano is because we are going to bridge this to something humorous that he and I worked. I'm not going to say it's humorous. It's probably not, but I don't care. We had fun doing it. So this is a ghost story from the Talmud. It's an actual ghost story. It's from Talmud Brachot 18b. Brachot is the Talmudic tractate that talks about all the blessings and when you say them. And it's a good example of how in the Talmud, people just meander off into topics that have nothing to do with anything whatsoever. And it's pretty typical. The least organized work you can imagine, especially considering it came from the Mishnah, which is very, very well organized, but it just rambles all over the place. And that's part of the fun of it, too. So here's the story. I don't know if I can do it in a spooky voice. One day, Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Yonatan were walking in a cemetery. Now, you know, in those days, they wore four-cornered garments, and at the four-cornered garments, at the end of them, they had the tzitzit. So when they talk about the garments dragging, they also mean the tzitzit dragging. Rabbi Yonatan's tzitzit was on the ground, and it was dragging across the graves. Rabbi Chia said to him, "Lift up your clothes so the dead will not be insulted. They may say tomorrow, when their day comes, they'll be buried with us, but now they're insulting us." Well, this starts a whole conversation in the Talmud about whether this is something we should even be talking about as Jews. There is a verse, and it's not the only one in the Bible, that indicates this important lesson that I believe most humanists will plug into. Dead is dead is dead. That's the bottom line. This one happens to come from that book of Ecclesiastes, Kohelet, that I mentioned, that Rabbi Wein and I both revere as our favorite book in the Bible. There it says, the dead know nothing. This was a man who believed in a very this-worldly life. But anyway, they continue arguing about it because that was something to argue about. And they were thinking about, well, is it only the bad people who don't get to have an afterlife? Is it everybody, the way it seems to indicate in the Torah, which it really does? It talks about them going down to Sheol, meaning the depths. And that just means basically a long dirt nap forever. Literally, it means that. Ultimately, somebody says, well, but is it really true that the dead don't know what's happening in the world? And here's a story of a righteous man who gave a poor person a dinar, a significant amount of money, on the eve of Rosh Hashanah one year during a time of drought. The man returned home, and his wife mocked him for being so generous during such difficult times. She harped on him endlessly, and to escape her constant criticism, the man went to sleep, where we would all go, in a cemetery. The only place he could get any peace of mind, I don't know. That night, while he was there, he overheard two spirits talking. One spirit said to the other, "Let us go roam the world and listen beyond this heavenly curtain behind which we lived and see what disasters may await them." The other spirit, a young woman who had died prematurely, said, "I cannot go with you, for I am buried beneath a mat of reeds. But you go and tell me what you hear." I have no idea why a mat of reeds would keep a ghost from going anywhere, but I do want to remind you that in our tales, ghosts go through walls, but they don't drop through floors. Just want to note that. So we're all aware that the inconsistencies here have continued. Okay. So the first spirit went and roamed around and then returned, and the second spirit, the young woman, said, "What did you hear from behind the heavenly curtain?" He replied, "I heard that anyone who plants during the first rainy season this year will lose their crops to hail." Hearing this, the righteous man, remember that guy sleeping in the cemetery, decided to plant his crops during the second rainy season. As predicted, hail destroyed the crops of everyone who planted during the first season, but his crops were spared. So, of course, on the following year, on Rosh Hashanah, which apparently is a very, very big night for ghosts, the same righteous man went down to the same cemetery on his own. And again, he heard the same two spirits talking. One said, again, let's go roam the world and find out what disaster will happen this year. The second spirit replied, I told you, I can't. I am buried beneath a mat of reeds. You go and tell me what you hear. The first spirit went, roamed, and came back. The second spirit asked, so what did you hear? And the first one said, this year, anyone who plants during the second rainy season will have their crops destroyed by blight. The righteous man, having overheard this, planted during the first rainy season. Sure enough, the crops of everyone else who planted during the second season were ruined, but his were not. At this point, the righteous man's wife began wondering what was going on here. She asked him, how is it that last year, when everyone else's crops were destroyed, yours weren't? Now this year, the same thing happened. What's your secret? And so, like that woman in the show Ghosts, anybody seen that comedy? It's cute. He told her the whole incredible story of the ghosts in the cemetery. The woman was amazed. She started to spread the word. There are ghosts in the cemetery from whom we can learn. But unfortunately, this story reached the ears of a woman whose daughter was buried there beneath a mat of reeds. There is no such thing, she said. You can't know this. And she said, I do know this, and I can prove it. Your daughter's secret, she is buried beneath a mat of reeds. Well, this just spoiled the whole damn thing. The next year, the man returned to the cemetery. He overheard the spirits talking, but this time one spirit said to the other, let's go and hear what's going to happen in the world this year. But the second spirit said, leave me alone. The things we've been talking about, they already know. Now, I know it's not that spooky, but it's best we've got in the Talmud. So to make it a little spookier, Joseph and I wrote a little ditty to a song that some of you may know. Only those of you who have taken your children to Disney World or Disneyland, your grandchildren, children. How many of you have been to Disney World or Disneyland? Oh, that's the majority of you, yes. So you've been to the Haunted Mansion, right? No? How do you go to, Elisa, you don't go to Disney World without going to the Haunted Mansion. You've been to the Haunted Mansion. It's the one with the really, really long line. Right in the middle of the damn place. So they have a song there called The Grim Grinning Ghosts, which, like It's a Small World, once you've been on this ride, you never forget that tune. It will be with you until the day that you are buried beneath a reed of mats or a mat of reeds. So here is our retelling with some original lyrics and some of ours of the Talmud story.
I have to give you a little verbal background on this. We became sort of like a last-minute Rodgers and Hammerstein here.
We did.
So he said, he's explaining this to me, and he gives me this text via email, and I'm trying to fit it with the music, and I got the music, and he said, have you ever heard of Grim Grinning Ghosts? I said, no. He goes, you don't know anything about popular things, do you? So
Pop culture, I said.
Pop culture. And I said, well, okay, sorry, but I went to musicnotes.com, and they had this Grim Grinning Ghosts.
Aren't you excited to go to Disney World now?
I'm so excited. I can't
really
wait.
Cheap. It's $500
Yeah, I go to the
for each
haunted
day.
house. Yes, exactly. I went to Disneyland a long
have it
time
there,
ago,
too.
and I was stuck in It's a Small World, and I think the road broke down. So seared in my memory is It's a world after all. No. So I guess
actually got stuck in the Haunted Mansion.
you got stuck in the Haunted Mansion. That's why this thing is haunting you.
Yes, no, the music went off, unfortunately. All right, so here's
So
our
anyhow, he gave me
Grim Grinning Ghosts.
this text, and I had to call him. I said, could you help me? So yeah, it was like we were writing a piece together, and so I can't take all the credit or the blame for
Please,
this.
Disney, don't sue
Talk
me.
to him, okay?
When mortal ears are close nearby, the spirits arise to go and spy. One ghost is stuck and cannot roam, so her friend goes all alone.
out in the world to know what's going down. Her friend returns with the latest facts. The mortal hears and decides to act. The story's heard, the news is out. The living know that ghosts are about. Grim grinning ghosts decide to say goodbye. Here's the audience participation. Let's hear the grim grinning ghosts saying goodbye. Woo! Come on, let's hear ya. Let's hear ya. Woo! Spooky! Yeah.
This is from the original now, right?
That was the original lyric. Now we go to Disney's original. As the moon climbs high o'er the dead oak tree, spooks arrive for the midnight spree. Creepy sound with fiery eyes start to shock and harmonize. Grim grinning ghosts come out to socialize. Woo! When you hear the knell of the requiem bell, weird glows gleam, oh God, weird glows gleam where spirits dwell. Restless bones, ethereal lies, rise as spooks of every size. Woo!
We're done?
I think so.
Okay.
Unless you're going to write another verse.
But the grim grinning ghosts, they got him. Okay. Thank you very much. A round of applause for our terrible yet successful effort. All right, so let's sing a real song. We'll conclude with Lachuna Ranana, a song about joy for Shabbat and Simchat Torah.
Lachuna Ranana, Lachuna Ranana, Lachuna Ranana, La Shabbat. Lachuna Ranana, Lachuna Ranana, Lachuna Ranana, La Shabbat. Nariya, Nariya, Layom Simchatenu, Nikadma Bishalom. Nariya, Nariya, Layom Simchatenu, Bizmirot Nariya-lo. Lachuna Ranana, Lachuna Ranana, Lachuna Ranana, La Shabbat. Lachuna Ranana, Lachuna Ranana, Lachuna Ranana, La Shabbat.
A big hand for Joseph's efforts. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, David, for the streaming, Arthur for the slides. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Happy Simchat Torah on Halloween.
Shabbat Shalom.